I oversee a pretty diverse portfolio. I manage a budget of about $180 million annually. Um, Working for the medical school has had it's been an interesting experience the last 18 months, 17 months, because while, we've heard last night, this morning, that the facilities guys have always stayed on. But in my case, it was slightly different because while one side of campus operations went down, people went home, there was another side that really ramped up because we are a research-intensive medical school and research really ramped up. So we were living in these two worlds of trying to help the people who were ramping up and all the issues associated with that, while ramping down other parts of the campus and trying to keep the campus safe. So it's been a very, very interesting experience. So right from the get-go, right from day one, we've been in a growth mode. And that has not changed. If anything, it has further accelerated. So very early on in the process, sometime, last, I would say September-ish of 2020, we hired a consulting firm to do some planning for us. And they said, hey, we are a national practice. We've been surveying people like crazy, over the course of the summer. And this is what people are telling us. They're asking questions like, what do you miss about the workplace? And 90% of the people said they miss the face-to-face interaction. And half of them said they miss the ability to collaborate. I think today, if we ask these same questions that they asked, 13, 14 months ago, I do not believe the answers would be the same. Would you guys generally agree with me? Do you all still miss the face-to-face interaction? Some said, yeah, softly. But I think we've all evolved over the last 18 months, and we've sort of adapted to our reality. The School of Medicine has been very deliberate in figuring out what our people are saying. And we have done, survey after survey, because the reality is our lives have changed pretty dramatically. 17th of March, 2020 was when we said, go home. Lights turned off, we all went home. So we went from being organizations that largely worked in offices, had a little bit of remote work, some dinosaurs like I always struggled with the idea. And then, like that, we were all remote. And guess what? I think we've certainly all survived. Some of us have probably thrived. Some of us are very tired. But we have done yeoman's work over the last 18 months, every single one of us as facilities officers. And I think we are a lot more stronger for it. But the question is, what is the future going to look like? And every time we think we know the answer, sorry, I should rephrase. Every time I think I know the answer, I have been proven wrong. And so I'm looking for answers today. And so I'm going to call on you guys because there's a lot of wisdom in this room. The one good thing we have done over the last 18 months is we have been consistently and continuously surveying our community. We had about 600 to 800 people that this survey went out to, mostly administrative and support staff. It's a fraction of the overall School of Medicine. The first survey went out to 600 or 800 people. The subsequent surveys eventually went out to like 5,000 people. But the interesting thing is that consistently our response rate has been very high. If you're 30, 40% response rate, you think you have a good survey. We're getting like almost 80% response rates. And almost 80% of the people we surveyed consistently have said, thank you very much. We're very happy with the remote work. We're actually liking it. The technology is working. We're sort of doing well. We are coordinating, and life is good. We are surprised that over the course of a year and 3 different surveys, the results have been consistent. And when results are consistent with such a large population, you have to sit up and wonder, right? This is just a rough timeline of what has transpired over the last 18 months or so. I think there was a time in March and April of this year when we all thought we're looking good. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and this is going to be fine. And boom, Delta hit, right? And we all took a step, 2 steps, 3 steps back. And I think it's only now that we are coming out of it. So, clearly there was a little bit of a wave action that happened. But throughout this time, there was a lot of assessment going on, because early on there was this recognition that for a lot of people, the future of work is flexible work. And so for a long period, we have been working, we've been asking, we've been thinking, and we live in Silicon Valley. We are surrounded by these behemoth technological companies, technology companies that were saying, oh, we're all going to be back in the office. No, we're all going to be remote. Oh, no, we're going to kind of be back in the office. They can afford to change their mind on a dime. We can't. So we decided that we are not going to make any final decisions almost until January of next year. But this summer, we decided that we are going to allow different organizations to do their own pilots and figure out what is it that's working for them. Because guess what? There's been lots of observations. But by and large, the issue of flexible work is not about space and facilities. Really? I thought everything was about facilities, don't you guys? It's not. It's really about HR. It's really about the people issue. And as hard as it was for me to really own that, I think that's right. Because there are lots of issues, especially in a place where we live, where we are competing with the technology companies for talent, where we don't pay enough as the technology companies pay, where we don't have stock options like the technology companies do. We are at a distinct disadvantage from recruiting, retaining, and creating a talent pool. So flexible work has become a very important sort of part and parcel of what we are trying to do. But from a facilities perspective, we have also made some observations that kind of sort of live a little bit in the HR world, but have great impacts on the facilities world. So what we have observed is that every job, I don't care what job, every job can be put into 4 buckets. The first bucket is production. It's what you do where you're working remotely or working anywhere, and we know now, even an old curmudgeon like me knows now that remote, you can do just fine working remotely and your production is fine. The second is engagement. We are engaging right now. Engagement has been happening on Zoom for a long time, but we all know that this is great. This is great to be in front of other people. So engagement, you sort of sit, on the fence. Some of it is great in person, some of it is great remotely. The third is service. Again, there's a lot of one-on-one service that can be done online. But sometimes, especially when dealing with students, there are other dimensions that come into play that make service much more effective in person. So similar to engagement, service lives partially online and partially in person. The fourth bucket is community. How many of you have had Zoom happy hours? Oh, come on. More of you have at least been invited to Zoom happy hours if you didn't participate. They're quite pathetic. Seriously. So there's a lot you can do on Zoom, but community doesn't happen in Zoom. I think it is much better in person, because community is where you go to show your love. So if all jobs can be put into these 4 buckets, and I will happily have a dialogue with anybody if there are more than 4 buckets. Somebody said to me, learning is a 4th bucket. I said, no, learning is engagement. It's part of how you engage, right? There are other things that I think fairly well fit into these 4 buckets. So if every job has 4 buckets, isn't it important to think that each job fills these four buckets differently? I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you something that, really a terrible example because they are polar opposites. I like to talk about two different jobs. Think of a data manager and the women's volleyball coach at Stanford. The data manager probably fills the focus job bucket 80% of the time. Heads down, doing their own work, can't happen anywhere. They've been successful at doing it anywhere. And maybe 20 to 30% of their work is distributed in the other three buckets. How much heads down focus work does the volleyball coach do? I don't know the answer, but I'm fairly certain it's not 80% or 70 or 60. They probably spend a lot more time with their team in engagement, perhaps in some service, but certainly in community. So why is it that we create the same kind of space for both these people? There are many architects in this room, and I will submit to you that I think the way we have programmed spaces is wrong. This is one of the things that we are learning. Every time you do a program, what's the first question you ask? In my 30+ years of working in this business, the first question has never changed. How many people do you have? Everything drives from that point forward. And when you do that, what you find is by and large 80%, okay, maybe not 80%, 70% of the space gets programmed for individual offices, cubes, call it what you may, and then the remaining 30% of the space, because none of us has infinite amount of space, right? Who has infinite amount of space here? Nobody. So the remaining space is divided into these other buckets. Is that the right way to do it? When we know that every job fills this bucket differently, shouldn't we be thinking more creatively of how to program spaces so that we don't get into these spaces where I love the fact that, look at this, somebody has left, the replacement hasn't come, it's all boxes. This is the community space, the end of the corridor. And then because I need my privacy, I go out there and buy these sliders that close things off. This is the only sort of community space we have, a little sorry kitchen. Are we really ready to adopt to a different way of working? How can we program differently? So we are trying to we are developing a more formulaic approach where every job starts to look into these four buckets, and based on that, we try and create spaces. Hopefully next year, I'll have a chance to talk more about that a little bit more. We did our own pilot. We're so used to assigning space. This was our office. Everybody had a cube. And we said, but this is not how we work. And this office really houses my project management group, my planning and space management group, me and a couple of other groups. We are so focused on what is mine, and this is where I live. That is deeply ingrained into our heads, right? How do we move from a model of ownership, this is mine, to a model of membership, this is ours? And we are so deeply ingrained into, I need to have my pictures, I need to have my knickknacks, my this, my that. It is a hard model to break. It is a very hard model to break. So we've gone to the point where we've changed our office from what looked like everybody had their own cubicle to everybody just gets this one sort of storage unit. That's yours. This happens to be mine. Sorry, actually in the corner. That happens to be mine. All the desks, we've gone to a hot desk model. Now we did this, this was operational 1st of August, so it's been 3 months. The space, used to accommodate in this traditional form, used to accommodate about 22 people. We have now increased, we've pulled in our business and finance group, so we are 32 people, 34 people using this space. Obviously the footprint hasn't increased. The reality is that since August, on an average day, there are no more than 6, 8, maybe 9 people in this room. So it has been working absolutely great. And this is our sort of pilot of changing the model more from this is mine to this is ours, from ownership to membership. This is easy to talk about, but I don't hear anybody talking about the cost. So when we did our little pilot project, we bought not one piece of furniture. We used everything we had, just rearranged it. We salvaged some more like pieces of furniture from other places. And all we did was reorganize our space. And because we are a facilities organization, we have to learn. And so this was our goal. No new furniture, use what we have. Guess how much we had to spend in only reconfiguring our space? Granted, I live in California, labor is expensive, $70,000. This is just for this little space. How many people are going to really be able to afford the kind of change that we're talking about? No furniture rep is going to talk to you about the cost of doing this. So this is a reality that I haven't still been able to wrap my head around, that at what price does change come? I have 3 other questions for you which are really difficult that I don't have even an inkling of an answer to. What is the single biggest change you envision? In my case, the thing that I worry about the most is my institution, like many of yours, is saying, January 7th, we are all going to be back in the workplace, right? You've heard that before. But 80% of your people don't want to be in the workplace. What are you going to do about that? We heard about somebody from Arizona State taking a job in Colorado because they could be remote. How are you going to deal with that? I don't have the answers, but if any of you do, please talk to me. I need help. The second is, what obstacles, if any, you're going to have to overcome? The biggest obstacle for me was I was having a hard time about this issue of everybody being remote, and oh my God. The reality is for professional work, we have no measurement systems of what effective work really is. So trust, integrity, honesty become really important currencies on which you measure how people are engaging. For me, that was a huge obstacle to overcome. The third, and perhaps the most important, is how do we preserve our culture? What is your culture? Right? We have done things at Stanford to break our culture over the last 2 or 3 years that was already in progress. How do we, each one has a different answer to what your culture is. So these are 3 questions that I would love to get some more insights from you because I really need the help. But I'll tell you the 3 things that I have observed is the future is still uncertain. Emotions and not logic are really driving decisions right now. Logic from an institutional perspective, emotions from a local perspective. Change, my friends, takes a lot of time and a whole lot of money. Thank you very much.